Boom. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so maybe a bit of a different direction than we go. Same story. Same narrative seems to be taking place. We're going to stitch in and weave the same tapestries again. But what I want to start by doing is thanking all you for joining us. Give us a thumbs up. Make sure the live stream is go perfect. Okay, it is rolling smoothly. So what I want to start by is actually looking at this kind of just a small little bit of data here. Boom. This is from a website called the Gold IRA Guide. Now, clearly they're biased based off the name of the website. So we're going to be reading, I guess, somewhat of a biased interpretation, but I wanted to start off with the idea of currencies, and this was kind of a nice take, some of the pieces here. So just kind of notice the similarity between each of these, right? So first we're going to start with the Chinese yuan. So different forms of the yuan have been issued nearly 24 times through different provinces over the past 125 years alone. So the yuan has similar roots to the Mexican peso, both of the sons of apparently a Spanish dollar, which widely circulated in the 17th and 18th centuries. Okay, I did not know that. Well, great. So 7 of these offers were mishandled through the notable came from nationalized central bank. Here's the first instance of things we should notice when things start to go wrong. The words nationalized and central bank. Okay, so in the aftermath of World War II, China was reeling from Japanese occupation, still revolving from its own civil war. So the central bank, China, began printing yuan at an alarming rate, peaking at an adjusted annual inflation rate of more than 5,000%. In 1949. In fact, research apparently from the Cato Institute estimates that it took an average of 5.34 days for prices to double in yuans between October 1947 and May 1949. That is some incredible down or upside, depending on where you look at what assets you're holding. Again, so our main kind of guiding light here is Bitcoin, but I just wanted to, again, recognize the thread between each of these. China then, now there is other common threads too. So China then actually resolved this in hyperinflation with a shockingly unoriginal but effective solution. It created custom gold units where each new yuan was backed by gold. The nationalist, or I guess later Republic government of Taiwan, continued to use stable silver until the year 2000. That's impressive. Most people were off metal and just willy-nilly printing to, match growth and inflation of people in the early 1970s. Next, we're going to look at the Roman denarius. I'm sure a lot of people know this story, but just for fun, again, I wanted to kind of give a background here for some of the thoughts around why our interest in Bitcoin is why we think so important. Okay, so the Emperor Roman Diocletian's treatment of the denarius coins was maybe the West's first great example of politically manipulated currency gone horribly wrong. Diocletian, I think I'm saying that right, was fighting the division of the empire and had at one point increased the size of the Roman legion fourfold in a vain attempt at stability. In the process, he also created massive shortages. Here again, notice the threads as we're going to get into this further. By instituting price controls. Okay, who just... I'm pretty sure the United States was doing a bunch of stuff around price controls and now massive shortages. Okay, so there's another thread we recognize. Forcing citizens into the black markets. And we've made this assertion commonly with something like Bitcoin, is that when push comes to shove, when these currencies start to fail, it's actually on the black market that they're the most valuable, because what you see on the currency, like the foreign currency exchange, like the numbers on the screen, are actually vastly different than the numbers that you're getting on the ground. And this is common of lots of things. So even the Venezuelan bolivar, what it says on the screen is definitely different than the trade you're getting on the ground. So that's important to recognize. So to top it all, he began diluting the silver and the content of the currency. So this kind of dilution off of something stable backing this monetary printing. Now, the Federal Reserve, we're going to get into this a bit further, but again, just note all the similarities. So by the mid-3rd century, neither the government nor the citizenry had valued the coins at all, making them worthless. So what were citizens actually doing? Hoarding real gold and silver, stockpiling in secret to the degree the tyrant couldn't ruin their purchasing power through the official denarius money. And again, We seem to see this greedy tyrant word here. This is another one we'll want to recognize. Control ultimately ends, I guess, here. So the Greek drachmy, I think that's how you say it. I'm again, ladies and gentlemen, here. I think Diocletian, drachmy. Some of these, I think I'm saying some of these more Latin words correct here. But anyways, you can correct me if I'm wrong by spelling out the word. So it's not an exaggeration to say that World War I and World War II caused. I think this is just more of like an informational exercise. I wanted to share this, just kind of going over this blog here, in part because it leads so well into a lot of our other a lot of things we go over frequently. So, episodes of monetary mismanagement. Then the rest of human history put together. Greece suffered at the hands of German and Italian occupiers between 1941 and 1944, who turned out money at reckless rates to finance conflicts across Europe. Okay, so here we go. So giving out large loans to countries for wars, like writing $40 billion check to Ukraine, for instance, would be a pretty reckless thing to finance across Europe. Sounds like, hey guys, sounds like a stupid thing to do. Well, whatever. So the Greeks were forced to support 400,000 Axis soldiers at the same time their productivity and income was also declining by 70%. Printing was their only option. In 1954, the new drachma, that's what it is, was trading at 50 trillion. I'm just reading that quickly. I think it says 50 trillion in the 1944 drachma. This is incredible. The Zimbabwe dollar, I'm sure a lot of people know this one too. Zimbabwe, along with Germany, is one of the most commonly known contemporary examples of hyperinflation and currency collapse. Mired in racial conflict and economically clueless governments, Zimbabwe began churning out new banknotes at unprecedented levels in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Inflation was the first international story in 2006 when it broke, that it reached over 1,000%. But this was just the beginning. If you thought 1,000% gain in the worthlessness of your currency was good, wait till what comes next. Zimbabwe then tried to compensate for rising prices by issuing larger and larger bills. Hey guys, I got an idea. Shit's get more expensive. Just add a zero. This is what solved this problem. In May 2008, the first notes with a value of greater than 1 billion Zimbabwe dollars was introduced into the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. By August of that same year, with inflation nearing, prepare yourselves, I think a 500 quadrillion percent, 500 quadrillion. I'm glad they clarified this because I'm just pulling numbers up. 500 quintillion. It's actually 3 zeros more than a quadrillion. Before the country passed a law by removing 10 notes from all prices and notes. Okay, great. Now let's just remove all those numbers, guys. We've got this under control. Again, so all we're doing here right now is I'm just trying to lay out a kind of a thread of thesis, and I thought this website did a good job. So not the normal video, but I wanted to go over this stuff anyways. I think it's important. And the optimistic view here too is because things always move forward. There's usually always a renaissance afterwards. So that's what I think the exciting thing to come. Going to be some bouncy, bumpy times. But number 5, I'm not going to go through all these, but I think you are getting a pretty clear picture. Belarus did not handle separation from the Soviet Union particularly well between 1993 and 2003. Belarusian ruble was so aggressively printed, and so much of the country's productivity was crushed by nationalization and price controls. There it is again. These motherfuckers be printing money and trying to tell people, hey, shit's too expensive. You can't gouge consumers for this. Gas price is way too high, so you can't sell that. And they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to sell the gas. And they stop making the gas, and then there's less gas, so the gas prices go the fuck even more. Like, we have the stupidest goddamn running these governments. Like, they have no... Guys, do you know how this shit works? Like, this anyways, so apparently history repeats itself in this kind of beautifully fractal arrogance of piles of currency collapses. Again, so this story seems to have a lot of commonality, and it repeats. Apparently, all currency essentially added 3 zeros. Unlike Zimbabwe, however, Belarus introduced a new currency before reaching quintillions of percent in inflation. Quintillions! That's a huge number. That's, again, 3 zeros more than a quadrillion, okay? Which is, and a quadrillion is 3 zeros more than a trillion, if I'm correct. I don't know. The next thing I wanted to go over here, Janet Yellen admits, I thought this was kind of interesting. I don't know how well we were able to hear this. Maybe not at all.
I was wrong then about
I was wrong then about the path that inflation would take. And I'm sure everyone saw the video of Christine Lagarde and they looked at the ECB balance sheet and then she's asked a very great question, which is like, how do we make this come down? And like, oh, it will come. It'll be like, well, okay, well, what's a good answer? You're not even going to try to answer that. You're just going to tell me like, no, don't worry, it will come. Like some mythical dream creature is going to come away and wipe all this abstract money printing off the table. And somehow that's not going to create massive inflation. Now, what that they didn't anticipate is that most of the inflation has actually been locked up in asset classes like the S&P 500, an index, individual assets, whether it's investments in companies like Tesla or Google. A lot of that inflation actually went into places where the average consumer isn't spending their money. And it wasn't until recently, until they started a war with Russia, until people are deciding to fight with each other instead of cooperate with one another. They don't realize that first off, if you're going to sanction Russia and then say, hey, we still want your oil and like grains and fuel and stuff, but we're not going to bank with you. You can't use PayPal anymore. It's like, I think a lot of people got this wrong. I think a lot of people think that the world is held in this like natural order of balance through military superiority. And in fact, if you look at nature, most things are held in balance by collaboration, by some level of symbiosis, even if it's a pretty aggressive one. I mean, the gazelle and the lion, the wolf and the deer, they're for a level of synergy to some degree. So I think what's difficult is that when we get into these areas and they're like, hey, we didn't know that the printing would cause inflation. It's like, well, first off, that's a fucking lie, because that's literally where inflation comes from. The inflation of the monetary supply. Somewhere along the way, people decided to think like, hey, we can just change the words and not say them, and it means something different. Like quantitative easing doesn't mean actually just money printing. I could get into an argument, I guess, about some of the semantics around, are they just actually printing dollars? Now, in Costa Rica here, it's noticeable because they're just literally printing new money. Now, all of a sudden, there's a whole new schwack of coins. And you can see it in the charts. You can see that money printing directly correlated in the charts. Most of it goes to assets first and then starts to affect the lower, I guess, purchasing prices. Now, what's interesting here is they're all confused about an 8% currency inflation, right? So they're like, oh, well, a lot of this is caused by these other subsequent things. But when we look back in history, they keep doing the same stuff. They start reckless spending wars that are just totally stupid, because a war is not keeping things in balance. Actually, people trading together, like free commerce and the ability for people to grow prosperity is actually what kept harmony, or was keeping harmony and peace, not nukes. I think people got that one wrong. That's a propaganda line by the military-industrial complex. No, we're keeping this shit together by nukes. Said, no, guys, this is when we start to collaborate. We actually, we're much more excited about what we produce, and we're less interested in blowing each other's shit up, and more interested in living a pretty, like an awesome life. Anyways, that's what kept things in balance. I'm not sure if anyone else knew that, or maybe people need to say it more. So here is the index in grains. So ultimately, if you have food price up 100%, inflation is up 100%. Now, it doesn't have to be directly due to money printing. One of the important things here is that this is the base level, right? So this is what people, wait, hold on. Actually, let me check. Do you guys eat food? Do you guys use fuel on a day-to-day basis? Because if you do, and those are kind of like a base part of reality, then everything is up 100%. Inflation is already up, basically 100% for average Joe. Here it is the energy index, and from 20. Let's be a little bit generous and at least go from the midway point of since 2015, and we're up 125% on the energy cost. So if on average your food is up 100% and your energy is up 100% and the gas is up 100%, all of that other cost expenditure is going to end up in every other product that you're hoping to buy. So inflation is already up 100%, whether it was caused by money printing or not. Now, again, we could make a really good argument that it's like 99% all money printing, but it shows up at different times depending on what's what's taking place. And there's a large degree, we could think that this is actually manufactured. I think that the human species is very capable of solving all of its problems. I think that whatever difficulties we're having now is just due to sheer stupidity of people that don't know how these systems work, like we see in the past when they go into things like, hey, price controls, where like, again, you see the same thing. We'll go over the Yugoslavian dinar for a minute. Between 1992 and 1995, Yugoslavia ruined, introduced, and then re-ruined. Thank you, Yugoslavia, for going over this one a few times for us here. Some governments really do think that money is just a number assigned to prices and that purchasing power is not a reflection of productivity and stability. Yugoslavia was then a poster child for this fundamental misunderstanding. During peak hyperinflation, the rate of prices increased more than 100% a day and had jumped more than a quadrillion % in just 2 years. Facing economic collapse, the government decided to adopt the German mark in January 1995. Now, this, if we can assume, again, like this is kind of just a general thesis, if we're now assuming that the base cost of energy, food, and fuel, which is like everything basically, is up 100%, then it will not take that long for that 100% carryover in that kind of base cost to be passed on to the consumer. That's how it always works. Price controls are usually then a government's attempt to say, hey, you're charging too much for the thing. It's like, well, it costs us this much, so if we can't sell it because it's too expensive, then we stop making it, and you have this horrible kind of downward spiral of productivity being clenched on by people that have never run a fucking functional business in their entire life, or politicians who take money from people who are working every day in some type of functional business and then spend it on stupid shit like wars, neglectfully throwing $40 billion of inflation again. And again, at least when they spend that, it doesn't hit Main Street of you because it's not going into milk, right? They're spending it on bombs that just blow up and they make more of it. It's like, Raytheon's going to make even more money. So it doesn't appear to me that people think these things through too often. And then sadly, what we end up having is a repeat of history, kind of time and time again. The Argentinian peso is probably a bit of another well-known story closer to home here. Argentina has faced a financial mess for most of the 20th century so far. It has the most extreme currency crisis between 1975 and 1992. Civil and political unrest came to head in 1975, leading to significant recessions. Argentina had been a serial defaulter, so very few lenders were even willing to entertain any credit granting. Those that did were asking for huge interest rates. The Argentinian government refused to borrow at such rates, so it turned into a printing press. By 1992, the peso was worth 1/1 of what it was worth just a decade later. And again, this is such a frequent story. It's important to understand that the reason why we're so excited about Bitcoin on long term is because the problems keep coming from the people inflating the currency supply and trying to promise things that aren't necessarily part of the productive economy. The government is a goddamn horrible business. It sucks at what it's supposed to be doing. If it were a private entity in any other way, we would have all thrown it out on its fucking ass. It's not productive or intuitive or even like that much social. There's not that much social enhancement. Now, we could go to specific areas. Like we all like firefighters. Like when there's your fields are on fire and shit and some guys with a great truck and a compressor. We're stoked about that. So there are very specific niche areas where we like social and public services. And I think there's a way to account for that. But nonetheless, politicians get into this kind of greedy, corrupt position where their job is to regulate the companies and to sell all the shit. And you have this, again, this horrible death spiral of corporate circle jerking and money printing. Okay, so what was the point of this? Why do I want to choose to go down this avenue today? Currently, the things that we would see in the past, like energy prices going up 100%, food prices going up 100%, this is, in effect, inflation of the monetary supply, because it's when the dollar hits a point that it can no longer afford the basic goods and necessities of the person, that's the social contract of a dollar, right? As we start to make more money, maybe we're less aware of it, and the dollar is much more about a value of wealth. But for the individual person, it's about the social contract of affording like bread and a roof over their head. if that starts or when that starts to break, you have a very serious social dilemma that creates this massive tumultuous underpinning of people, because the majority of people are actually the poor, in effect, right? I don't know what the number is, but I should probably have added this, but when these energy index start to cost so much, and the majority of people who live on less than like a $5 a day budget, and now their $5 a day budget can't even afford what the kind of simple costs of bread and rice were, because of, in effect, this inflation is up 100%. This is these are basic costs of goods, effectively, and that's a little more direct than the CPI figures, but who cares? I mean, this is what people are paying for the most, I guess, fundamental access to what we would consider energy in a day-to-day basis. So what does this mean? One of the reasons why we're so bullish on Bitcoin is because in times of crisis, in times of these degradations of the currency, holding on to the currency is a horrendously bad idea, right? Now, during the process, your portfolio is going to grow incredibly large numbers. Like, if you had kept gold, let's say, during this devaluation of like a 1 billionth, the gold actually stayed relatively the same inside of Argentina. So it grew by 1 billion at that particular time. Now, this is what I've been trying to kind of reiterate, is I think that when push comes to shove, when Bitcoin really starts to shine, we're going to see these really weird things start to happen in terms of the credit markets, the currency markets, and the way people value things, businesses even. You know, we in our kind of board meeting the other day, we were joking about, well, when do companies or hedge funds start to measure their growth in Bitcoin instead of the US dollar? Now, again, we could get into some arguments about which culture will kind of take up the mantle next, because, you know, you'd have to rebuild a lot of trust inside of a lot of this ecosystem, and Bitcoin ultimately does that. So I think that this form of decentralized community is really the leading contender for like who takes up the mantle. You know, a lot of people like Ray Dalio is like, oh, it's going to be the Chinese. It's like, I think it's going to be everybody. It seems more likely that the decentralized municipal form, micro processing ending in micro governance, is kind of the result, the inevitable result here. So Bitcoin has been this, for us at least, always this kind of far out and every day more and more likely bet that that's what happens, and this is how it looks like in the future. So through all this tumultuous chaos, when things start to reevaluate to 1 billionths of each other potentially, that's when Bitcoin's up at millions of dollars, right? Well, and then what's the price of your average grains of rice? Now, again, because now if you start to measure Bitcoin against rice, looks a little bit better than the US dollar even still, right? Like, technically Bitcoin's getting destroyed versus that rice and fuel cost. So this is, I think, where things start to become more important, is when we look at the tradable value of asset to asset for that function. That's where it really starts to trip up, is because our currencies are being degraded by these people that are apparently like, oops, wait, I was wrong. And then, I don't know, again, if you saw this one, Christine Lagarde, I didn't see your name there. Oh, this was, I should have brought it up earlier, but upload date. Yeah, this, I think, was this it?
What I say is number one.
No, this wasn't it. Anyways, I should have brought this video up prior, but for those of you, again, that didn't see it, she basically says we have no answer. not even one that we could pretend that we could come up with. So they're just repeating the same process. So how do you manage that risk over the next 10 years? Because it seems to be like no one's paying attention at the wheel here. And I believe, again, very strongly that Bitcoin is going to take that. Although I wasn't a big fan of the Bitcoin standard, I think that decentralization becomes the standard. And that through that, you need all the other operating systems like Ethereum. I think you need Avalanche. I think you need all of them. I think decentralization really calls for people to make their own voluntary choices for how they would like to participate in a peer-to-peer market. A free market seems like the most productive where people can enter in contracts that they are all agreeing on. Anyways, just a quick little sideline. There's a few other things I wanted to go over today, just while we're here, and I've got the time. I'm going to take a look at a few of your guys' thoughts. Tyranny comes with crisis. Yes, often they try to jump in and control things in that last ditch effort to be like, oh no, we're going to price control, and no, they're charging too much, and it's not how it works, guys. My government has assured me inflation is safe and effective. I trust the science. Yes, trust the science. Inflation is safe and effective. Okay, actually, that's fantastic. That was one of the best things I've heard today. I'm going to tweet that. For those of you that don't follow me on Twitter yet, we're going to tweet that. Who said it? Inflation is safe and effective. That was too good not to share. Good work. You're going to be quoted as Anon because I just don't have the time right now to go any further than that. There we go. Okay. Thanks for that. That was fun. Let's go back here, take a look at a few more guys' thoughts and questions. Okay. The EU is, I'm not going to repeat, but probably first country to reach a Googleplex and inflation rate wins. Raytheon happy. Yeah. Awesome. Some funny comments in here, guys. I won't repeat some of them, but they're funny comments. Awesome. Okay. So I did have one more thing I wanted to look at here. Again, just as kind of a final touch here. Okay, first off, again, I'm super freaking bullish on businesses and technology that change the way we communicate value to one another. That's like our core principle thesis. In crisis, it's even better. Anything that's being adopted during the moments of crisis is like, boom, that's what we're looking for. That sits right in the center. So even the volatility is because especially in a mode of crisis, we know volatility is very high. They still operate. Then that kind of drives right down the center of a lot of what's kind of switched our interest into Axie Infinity too. Is like, hey, here's this grass fire adoption of something in the middle of a crisis. Games and ownership of that brand and that game is so valuable that, wow. So we really try to look for that, and Bitcoin's always had that at the core of its thesis. Again, more as an inherent monetary communication of value, but ownership of value of brand is extraordinarily powerful. We should not underestimate that. I think anyone who does is clearly not paying attention. But yeah, we need multiple forms of of decentralized ownership of yeah. So where was I looking at? One sec, ladies and gentlemen. Oh yeah. So which brings us to the dollar. We're going to go on the 1 month time frame here. So the dollar, or this index, is a bunch of manipulated ideas around how they think things are valuable, largely to maintain confidence. You can scare the shit out of people, clearly, with a bunch of irrationality in ideas. So this has actually been kept somewhat stable. Again, pretty easy to tell that there is a downward trend. We're going to take this out of the log here. And we've just pinched up into a long-term downward trend line. A few of them technically we had actually jumped over recently, but what's important here again is that the US dollar has kind of found this homogeneous function as the centralized currency, and a lot of them are held up by nothing but pixie dust. I was watching videos around the Chinese ghost cities recently and how we build things to take out loans against the things to create more apparently productive value around the thing, but It's just fucking nonsense bullshit, really. I mean, as a society, we are not interested in truth. We are just interested in what's profitable. It's fucking ridiculous. And I think on the other side of that, there is a renaissance. I believe that we're not far away from a renaissance in a bunch of things, which is, first off, super exciting. So no matter how chaotic this dumb shit gets here, I'm very optimistic about what comes next, because the human species has been always ingenious, full of fucking tyrants and sociopaths to try to take over somewhere along the way, but ingenious nonetheless. So I think we're going to see a rebound. We probably pull back on the dollar a little bit. It would be good. Again, there's a real reason to bet here that we're dealing with maybe a much more corrupt source. And then if that's the case, we're going to witness something that's quite abstract. Right now, are these shortages, like, are they really doing it on purpose? Are they really like trying to ban buying Russian oil? Like, is that, is society really that fucking stupid to think that this is going to work? Like, we just have no understanding of complex systems. It's just, we're going to break it. So we might break it here. That would be very concerning. But again, in the moment of crisis, we're going to see the hugest of opportunities. So be sharp, pay attention, not defensive. I want to be as optimistic as possible. I don't want to be like, even though, the gardener is out planting more banana trees and adding more fruit trees and productive landscaping to the property, we'll try to always be as optimistic about the future as possible. So I think we see a breakdown in the dollar. I think they go into some type of easing for a minute. Canada's bank just tightened. We see some incredible inflation taking place, but that tightening is not going to do anything. It's not going to do a goddamn thing. Taking more taxes from people is not going to do a goddamn thing. Like, these fuckers in charge right now are so stupid. Jesus. The people that are running the show right now, or either that or it's malicious. And every day more and more, I believe that it is actually malicious instead of just stupid. Because really, you're going to really? Must be malicious then. Okay, so that I think means we're closer to understanding the benefit of the renaissance that comes afterwards. So, yeah. Okay. Little bit. We're gonna cut a little bit of short. I just wanted to jump on. I wanted to mainly look at those earlier currency debacles. They printed so much extra capital, and even though they're not printing more, it's two things. A, there's a shit ton of inflation to begin with, and then B, if you manufacture shortages by starting wars with people, or rather insisting on continuing to war with people, we lose the social contract, we lose the fabric of society, all the numbers start to go haywire. We're already up 100%, and it wasn't just that either. Like, ladies and gentlemen, hold on, I guess really clear, I should make this very clear. It's not like Russia and Putin caused us to be at 100% price inflation. We were already at like 90% inflation in general prices of energy, grains, costs of every single good out there before that happened. So it wasn't like, all of a sudden Russia did some shit and the costs are super high. No, this just exacerbates an already ridiculous problem. That's what's so hard to comprehend. So here again, just as this is the index on grains. Okay, so this is September 21. Russia ain't doing nothing over here, and we were already 70% above the average cost for the last decade of grain prices. Now we just happen to be 120% instead of 70%. Like, we're blaming the wrong people. This is all coming from one area. This comes from the inflation of the monetary supply and mismanagement from dumb, stupid shitheads who think they can price control our way into a more productive society that's more fair and equal. That's not how free economy should work. What we need to do is find out how to get to a free economy. So, last vestige of hope here. A Bitcoin to ring out the U.S. dollar and start us into a renaissance, hopefully of truth mechanisms more so than anything else. It's a much longer story. I did want to leave off with one last thought, though. It's one of my favorite thoughts from this morning. Yes. Okay. So. For those of you that don't know, this is let's make it even bigger. Yeah, this is a photo of a Mandelbrot set. I loved this. I thought it looked like a person meditating with this is their head up here and their hands. on their knees. It looked like a cross section of a person sitting cross-legged. And for those of you that don't know, the Mandelbrot set is this beautiful form and function that shows the relationship of all the numbers within a set and all the numbers outside of that set between the imaginary numbers on an X and Y axis. So kind of a complex thought to go through, but a very unique one. And what it does, it creates all these beautiful features that you can basically zoom into and out of infinitely. And depending on which part you focus in on, you get a different infinitely repeating picture. But the Mandelbrot set itself, this kind of circle original function, is a visual representation of a set of numbers along an X and Y axis, effectively. And again, what's interesting here is that I want to this from a book I read last year, and I wanted to recommend. It's called had to put the quote down here on the bottom. It's by Benoit Mandelbrot, the person who discovered this sequence of numbers. Now, again, obviously, this thing exists within nature. We are just able to give a visual representation of what the numbers look like here through these programs. But this is a quote from his book here. It says, companies and stock prices, trade flows, and cryptos. Now, I added cryptos there just because it makes sense. Crop yields and commodity futures are all interrelated to one degree or another in ways we have barely begun to understand. In such a world, it is common sense that events in the distant past continue to echo in the present. I thought this was a very astute quote by a very brilliant man on an idea that is encapsulated and so well in image and hard to describe with words. Mr. Benoit Mandelbrot for this one here. So the Misbehavior of Markets is a fantastic book. I think understanding some of that also allows for this kind of piece of this longer story we've been talking to, which is, again, they're destroying currencies on the underlying. They've been doing that for a long time, and productive assets and kind of real value communication is occurring on the bottom end. So we look for that, especially in times of crisis. And I thought this was a kind of a beautiful way to top it off with something that's not so focused on fear, but to try to remember that what we're visualizing, like everything that we're going through, is kind of a reflection of something very similar to this. I thought that was a fun little thought exercise. So that's what I wanted to leave you off with today, Bear Family. And yeah, if you have not read this book, or you do not know who Benoit Mandelbrot is, or you've never seen a Mandelbrot set and kind of understand what this is, when I talk about scale and variance, if you dive just even surface layer deep here, actually, let's maybe even look at it together. A Mandelbrot set zoom. Let's see if we can get one here really quickly. Yes, these are a bunch of kind of standard iterations of the Mandelbrot set. Let's see if there's some really nicely colored ones. Yeah, here we go. So this would be there's your standard Mandelbrot, which is that black circle there, and then as you zoom in, you start to see these repeating fractal versions. Now, what's interesting too is that for those of you that have ever flown in a plane, which I'm sure there's a high majority of you have done that, they also seem to look like mountain peaks and valleys. They also start to look like ferns and universes. And this, in effect, again, is just a visual representation of a number sequence too. So I thought this was, a great exercise to remember that the majority of the fabric of the universe, this is kind of what the code looks like. And that the markets themselves and the world, or the story and the narrative that we're living in, is actually no different than all the beauty of this kind of washy, colorful image that we see here. So, for those of you that haven't spent any time with a Mandelbrot set or looking into how we get to this geometric fractal function, and some of the things I like to speculate about its relationship to and large, Benoit Mandelbrot, the man who created it, actually also, again, wrote a book called The Misbehavior of Markets, and trying to understand crop yield commodity futures are actually all interrelated through crazy, fun, colorful shit like this. Anyways, the Tio the Arcane Bear will be the 667th like on this video. And we'll see. Actually, we're just doesn't that look great? Jeez, we can just end on that for a bit. That's what we need more of in our life. Everybody needs more fractals in their life at this point. Anyways, Tio the Arcane Bear, boom.